The fluorescent lights in the break room had been flickering for 3 weeks and nobody had fixed them. Tessa noticed things like that now, small failures the company couldn't be bothered to address, the way a flickering bulb mirrors the promises that were made and quietly forgotten. She was sitting at the corner table with her lunch untouched, staring at her phone screen, reading the same text message from the school nurse for the 4th time. Noah threw up again during second period. You'll need to come get him. Tessa Calloway pressed her thumbs against her eyes and breathed slowly. 9 years. She had given this logistics company 9 years of her life, 9 years of early mornings and skipped lunches and weekend calls she always answered, because that's what you did when you were trying to hold everything together alone. Noah's father had walked out when Noah was 2, leaving behind a half-empty closet and a checking account with $43 in it. Tessa had rebuilt from that. Quietly, carefully, without asking anyone for help. But the past 8 months had been different. Noah was 7 now, and something had gone wrong inside him that no one could fully explain yet. His stomach hurt almost every day. He cried in the mornings before school. He'd lost weight the pediatrician called concerning, and the specialist appointments kept multiplying. Gastroenterologist, child psychologist, nutritionist, each one another copay she calculated against her grocery budget in the parking lot before walking in. She typed back to the nurse, "On my way." Then she sat for another 30 seconds, knowing what came next. Her supervisor, Brendan, was a man who spoke entirely in performance metrics. He had printed her attendance record twice in the last month and left it on her desk without comment, which was its own kind of comment. When she found him near the dispatch floor and explained that Noah was sick again, he looked at her the way people look at something they're already done with. "Tessa." He said her name like it was a full sentence. "This is the 3rd time this month." "I know. He has a medical situation," I've explained. "I understand that, but we have deadlines. The Hartwell account is due for review tomorrow morning and you're the only one who knows where Chen's files are organized." He crossed his arms. "You need to figure out a different arrangement for your son." "He's 7, she said. "I understand that." He didn't understand anything. She could see it in the practiced patience of his face, the way he was being careful not to say the thing he was actually thinking, which was that her son was her problem and her problem was becoming the company's problem, and the company didn't want that math anymore. She drove to school with her jaw tight and the radio off. Noah was sitting outside the nurse's office in his blue jacket, hunched slightly, looking smaller than he should have. When he saw her push through the glass doors, something in his face shifted, relief and guilt at the same time, the way children learn too early to feel sorry for needing their parents. "Hey, buddy." She crouched down and pressed her hand against his forehead, warm but not burning. "I'm sorry, Mom." "Don't be sorry. Come here." He leaned into her shoulder and she held the back of his head, and for a moment she didn't care about Brendan or the Hartwell account or any of it. This was the only thing that was real. In the car, Noah fell asleep within 10 minutes, his cheek pressed against the window. Tessa drove and thought. She thought about the specialist visit next Thursday that she hadn't yet figured out how to pay for. She thought about the 3 days of unpaid leave she'd already used this quarter. She thought about the flickering light in the break room and the printout Brendan had left on her desk and the quiet accumulation of a company deciding it was done with her. And she thought about what Noah had said 2 weeks ago, on a night when she'd come home at 8:30 after a late call with the West Coast team, and he was already in bed but not yet asleep. She'd gone in to check on him and he'd looked up at the ceiling and said, in the matter-of-fact way that children say devastating things, "Mom, do you like work more than you like being with me?" She had told him no, absolutely not, never. She had said it the right way with her full attention and her hand on his cheek, but in the dark after he fell asleep, she had lain there next to him and understood that the answer she'd been living, the actual answer, the one written in her schedule and her phone calls in her absence, was more complicated than what she'd said out loud. That was the moment she had started to consider it. She didn't make the decision quickly. She wasn't impulsive. 9 years of solo parenting had sanded that out of her. She made a spreadsheet. She talked to her sister in Columbus for 2 hours on a Sunday afternoon. She applied for 3 different positions at other companies and got 1 callback that went nowhere. She tried to believe that the situation at work would improve, that Brendan would back off, that Noah would stabilize. But 2 weeks later, she was called into HR. The woman across the desk had the careful tone of someone delivering a scripted message. Tessa's performance wasn't in question, she was told. Her work was valued. However, her availability had become a structural concern given the demands of her current role. They wanted to discuss a transition. Transition, a beautiful word for being quietly dismantled. Tessa listened to the whole thing without interrupting. Then she said politely that she needed to think about it over the weekend. She drove home and sat in the driveway for 15 minutes after she turned off the engine. Then she went inside, made Noah his grilled cheese, helped him with his reading homework, gave him a bath, read him 2 chapters of his favorite book about the dog who wanted to be an astronaut, and waited until he was asleep. Then she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and wrote her resignation letter. It took 11 minutes. She had been drafting it in her head for weeks without admitting it to herself. She didn't write anything dramatic. She thanked the company for 9 years of opportunity. She gave 2 weeks' notice. She said she was choosing to prioritize her family's needs at this time. Professional, clean, nothing they could use against her. She read it over twice, then pressed send before she could talk herself out of it. The silence after that was enormous. She closed the laptop and looked around the kitchen, at Noah's drawings held to the refrigerator with alphabet magnets, at the stack of medical bills she'd organized into a folder by date, at the single plant on the windowsill that she'd managed to keep alive despite everything. She felt terrified. She also felt, underneath the terror, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Like herself. The next morning she told Brendan in person. He was unsurprised in a way that stung. A few of her colleagues hugged her. Most said the right things in the wrong tone. She packed her desk items into a paper bag, it wasn't even enough for a box, and walked out at noon on a Tuesday with the sun too bright and her hand shaking slightly around the bag handles. The first week was almost peaceful. She took Noah to his appointments. She cooked real dinners. She helped him build an elaborate cardboard city on the living room floor that took up most of the space and that neither of them were willing to take down. He laughed more. She noticed. But money doesn't wait for emotional recoveries. By the 3rd week the numbers were unavoidable. Her savings, depleted by months of medical co-pays and the gap between what insurance covered and what things actually cost, had maybe 5 weeks left in them. She'd filed for unemployment, but the process was slower than the bills. She applied to 14 jobs. She got 2 phone screens and no callbacks. One company told her she was overqualified. Another went silent after the 2nd interview. She sold her grandmother's jewelry box, not the jewelry, just the box, because she'd already sold most of the jewelry the previous year. She canceled Noah's weekend art class, which he didn't complain about, but she saw him look at his supply kit in a way that she felt in her chest. One evening she was helping Noah practice his reading and the words on the page blurred. She blinked. Realized she hadn't eaten since the crackers she'd had at 11. She got up, went to the kitchen, stood in front of the open refrigerator for a moment, then closed it and came back and sat down like nothing had happened. Noah looked at her over the top of his book. "Are we going to be okay, Mom?" 7 years old. Asking it not with panic but with the quiet gravity of a child who has already learned that the world requires this question sometimes. "Yes," she said, and she believed it, mostly, which is different from believing it completely, but it was enough to say without lying. What she didn't say was that the electricity bill was overdue, or that she'd already called the landlord once about the following month's rent and been told she had until the 15th, or that she quietly looked into food assistance programs the night before and then closed the browser and sat with her hands in her lap for a long time. A few days later, on a gray Wednesday afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Tessa was in the kitchen going over paperwork, insurance forms mostly, the particular torture of insurance forms when she heard it. She assumed it was the mail carrier with something that needed a signature. She pushed her chair back and walked to the door in her socks and opened it without checking first. The woman standing in the hallway was not the mail carrier. She was somewhere in her 50s, wearing a charcoal gray coat that was clearly expensive without advertising it, the kind of clothing that has no visible effort. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She was carrying nothing except a folder, and she was looking at Tessa with an expression that was difficult to read, serious but not cold, careful in a way that suggested she had thought about this moment before arriving in it. Behind her, slightly to the left, stood a man Tessa didn't recognize, also in professional dress, also quiet. Tessa stared. "Miss Calloway," the woman said. "My name is Judith Hale. I'm the Regional Director of Operations at Meridian Logistics." She paused. "I know this is unexpected. I was hoping we could talk." Meridian Logistics was not the company Tessa had left. Meridian was the parent company, the umbrella corporation that owned her former employer as a subsidiary, the name that appeared at the bottom of the organizational chart that nobody below a certain level ever really thought about. Tessa had heard the name in meetings. She had never met anyone from there. As far as she knew, nobody at her level ever did. She became aware that she was standing in her socks, with insurance paperwork on the kitchen table behind her and Noah's cardboard city visible through the living room doorway. "Okay," she said, because she didn't know what else to say. "Come in." Judith stepped inside and looked around the apartment the way someone looks when they're trying to take something in honestly rather than judge it. Her eyes moved to the drawings on the refrigerator. She said nothing about any of it. The man who came in with her, she introduced him briefly as her assistant, Gordon, stood near the door and stayed quiet. Tessa offered them water. Judith accepted. They sat at the kitchen table across from each other, the insurance forms still spread out between them, neither of them acknowledging them. "I'll be direct," Judith said, "because I don't think you have patience for anything else right now, and I wouldn't blame you." She set the folder on the table but didn't open it yet. "I've been watching what happened at your office for the past several months. Not specifically watching you, watching a pattern. You were not the first person in that branch to be pushed toward a transition because of caregiving responsibilities. You won't be the last, unless something changes." Tessa waited. "I became aware of your resignation last week. I read your file." Judith's expression shifted slightly, something moving behind it. "And then I found out why you left, specifically. Not the official reason. The actual reason." "I left because my son needed me," Tessa said, keeping her voice level. "I know." Judith looked at the table for a moment. "My assistant pulled the attendance records. But it was your exit interview notes that made me come here. You wrote something that said a review, started again. You wrote that the hardest part wasn't the financial risk. It was your son asking you if you liked work more than being with him." The kitchen went very quiet. "I have a daughter," Judith said. Her voice was steady but changed in quality, like something had been taken out of it. "She's 12. 2 years ago she said something similar to me. Not those exact words, but close enough that when I read your notes, I had to put them down and walk away from my desk." Tessa didn't say anything. She looked at the woman across from her and saw something that she hadn't expected to see in someone wearing that coat in that position. The particular look of someone who has been quietly carrying a weight they don't often put down in front of other people. "I didn't do what you did," Judith said. "I didn't leave. I told myself I'd adjust, and I adjusted a little, and then things went back to how they were because systems have gravity." She folded her hands on the table. "I've been thinking about that ever since, about what it takes to actually change something instead of just adjusting around it." She opened the folder. Inside was a document, several pages, with Meridian's letterhead at the top. Tessa looked at it without touching it yet. "We're building a pilot program," Judith said, "a new model for how we structure work for employees with caregiving responsibilities, flexible scheduling with no penalty, remote options built into the role architecture, not granted as exceptions, full medical coverage including specialist coordination services." She paused. "We need someone to help design it from the inside, someone who has actually lived what we're trying to fix." Tessa's eyes moved slowly down the first page. "The position is new," Judith continued. "It's not your old job. The title is Senior Policy and Operations Advisor. The salary is," she named a number that was 30% higher than what Tessa had been making. "And before you ask, the schedule is genuinely flexible. That's not language in a handbook that disappears when the quarter gets hard. It's written into the role structure." Tessa looked up. "Why?" she asked, not challenging, genuinely asking. Judith held her gaze. "Because you did something that requires more courage than most people give it credit for. You chose correctly when the correct choice was the harder one, and because I should have done it 2 years ago, and I didn't, and I'm not sure I'll ever completely stop thinking about that." Her voice didn't crack. It just got quieter. "I can't undo my own choices. But I can do something with this one." From the hallway behind Tessa came the soft sound of small feet. Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway in his socks and his faded dinosaur shirt, looking at the strangers at the table with the alert, assessing look of a child who has learned to read a room. "Mom," he said carefully, "are these people from your work?" "Not exactly," Tessa said. "Come here." He padded over and stood next to her chair. She put her arm around him without thinking about it. Judith looked at Noah and something in her face opened. "Hi," Noah said. "Hi," Judith said. "What's your name?" "Noah." "I have a daughter," Judith said. "Her name is Clara. She likes building things." Noah's eyes moved to the living room doorway where the cardboard city was visible. "I built a city," he said, with the specific pride of someone who has made something real. "I can see that," Judith said. "It looks like a good city." He considered this seriously. "It still needs a hospital," he said. "And a place for dogs." "Every city does," Judith agreed. Tessa watched the two of them and felt something shift in her chest, not relief exactly, not yet, but the first loosening of something that had been locked for a long time. like a window opened in a room that had been closed too long. She looked back at the folder, at the Meridian letterhead, at the number on the page that would mean no specialist appointments without the parking lot math. That would mean not selling things. That would mean being home in the mornings instead of already on the road. "Can I have a few days?" she asked. "Of course," Judith said. She pushed the folder gently across the table. "Take what you need. My direct number is on the last page, not the main office line, mine." She stood. Gordon, near the door, straightened up. Judith buttoned her coat and looked at Tessa with a directness that felt different from authority, more like recognition. "For what it's worth," she said, "the letter you sent when you resigned, the line where you said you were choosing to prioritize your family's needs. Everyone in HR reads those as the polite version of something else. I read it as someone telling the truth plainly." She paused. "That's rarer than it should be." Tessa walked them to the door. After they left, she stood in the hallway for a moment with her hand still on the doorknob. Then Noah appeared at her elbow. "Mom," he said, "are we still going to be okay?" She looked down at him. At his face, open and trusting and carrying just enough worry to remind her what this had always been about. "Yeah," she said, "we are." Not the way she'd said it before, in the middle of the fear, measuring it. This time she said it like a fact. She closed the door and went to sit on the floor next to the cardboard city. Noah sat beside her and started explaining his plans for the hospital wing, where the ambulances would park, how the rooms would be organized, why there needed to be a rooftop garden. She listened to all of it. She was in no hurry to be anywhere else. Later, after Noah was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table and read through the folder again, slowly, every page. Then she opened her laptop and looked at her bank balance and the stack of medical bills and the overdue electricity notice and the calendar with the next specialist appointment marked in red. Then she opened a new email, addressed to Judith Hale's direct line, and typed, "I don't need a few days. I've already thought about it more than I realized. I'm in. Let's build something better." She read it once, pressed send, closed the laptop. Outside the window, the neighborhood was quiet. A car passed. Someone's dog barked twice and then stopped. Tessa sat in the kitchen for a while longer, not doing anything, just sitting. Letting the quiet be what it was, not emptiness this time, but space. The kind that comes after something finally ends and before something true begins. Some decisions look like surrender from the outside and feel like freedom from the inside. Some choices that appear to cost everything turn out to be the moment when you finally stop paying for things that were never worth the price. And sometimes the person who shows up to change your life is someone who needed you to show them that change was possible first. Noah's cardboard city sat in the living room, waiting for its hospital and its place for dogs. Tessa thought she might help him build it tomorrow. They had time now. They had something better than time. They had the kind of mornings where nobody had to apologize for being needed. I keep thinking about the moment Tessa stood in her kitchen after sending that resignation letter, not crying, not celebrating, just sitting with her hands in her lap in the quiet. That image stays with me. Because most of us have stood somewhere like that, not necessarily at a kitchen table, not necessarily over a resignation letter, but at that exact crossroads where doing the right thing and doing the safe thing are pointed in completely opposite directions, and you have to choose which fear you're more willing to live with. What Tessa did wasn't reckless. That's the part people misread when they hear a story like this. She didn't quit on impulse. She made a spreadsheet. She called her sister. She applied to other jobs. She gave it time. What she had was something rarer than courage in the dramatic sense. She had the kind of moral clarity that comes from paying close attention to what actually matters, and the honesty to stop pretending the math was adding up. That's a form of integrity that most of us underestimate, because it's quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits there in your chest until you finally listen to it. And I think about Noah asking his mother if she liked work more than being with him. 7 years old. He didn't ask it with anger. He asked it the way children ask things when they've already started to accept an answer they don't want. That question was the moment the truth became unavoidable, not a dramatic confrontation, just a child being honest in the way children are before they learn to protect people from what they actually feel. Tessa heard it and couldn't unhear it. That's what real wisdom looks like sometimes. Not a revelation, just finally stopping the noise long enough to hear what was already true. What came after the resignation wasn't easy, and I think that matters to say plainly. She sold things. She skipped meals. She sat in front of an open refrigerator and closed it without taking anything. The consequences were real and they were hard, and she bore them without performing her struggle for anyone. There's a kind of strength in that, not the loud kind, not the kind that needs an audience, but the kind that just keeps going because the alternative is giving up on something you've already decided is worth protecting. That's not stubbornness. That's endurance that knows what it's for. And then Judith arrived. I've thought about why that moment feels so true even knowing it's a story. It's because Judith wasn't transformed by Tessa's bravery. She was reminded of something she already knew. She'd heard a similar question from her own daughter 2 years earlier and had done nothing with it. Tessa's choice gave Judith's regret somewhere to go. That's how things actually change, not through grand gestures but through one person doing the honest thing and another person being close enough to witness it and choosing, finally, to act. 3 qualities carried Tessa through everything in that story. The decency to tell the truth about what she valued. The wisdom to understand the difference between what felt secure and what actually was. And the sheer endurance to hold on through the weeks when nothing was working and the answer wasn't visible yet. I don't think those qualities are rare. I think most people have them. I just think life builds a lot of noise around them, and sometimes it takes a moment of impossible choice to hear them clearly again. Noah's cardboard city was still waiting for its hospital. Tessa had time to help him build it now. That detail is small and it's everything.